Good.
Louise Hay film, Greg Braden interview, take one.
I was trained as a scientist. My background's in the hard sciences, physical sciences, the earth sciences. In the 60s and 70s, when I received that training, there was no room for the possibility of the kind of things that we're talking about now, the kinds of things that suggest that our inner world and our inner thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs in any way affect the world around us. And it was through direct experience what I began to understand was that this is the great secret that everyone knows except us in the West. Almost any other culture that we go to, from the monasteries in Egypt and Tibet and India and Bolivia and Peru, the indigenous traditions, little villages in the Andes Mountains, they all know that there is this experience that we can have inside of our bodies that affects our world in some way, and our science simply has not allowed for that historically. But I was trained as a scientist, and I was trained to look in the world around me for my answers, so I began to go to these places. I began to go into the monasteries, all the places that I mentioned. And it was through the direct experience of sitting in the presence of people who have lived and practiced the kinds of traditions that Louise Hay and the other authors I'm so blessed to be sharing the stage and this information with, that they teach about. And what we begin to understand is that this is the place where science got it wrong. There are two places, two assumptions that science has made, modern science. And they're coming full circle and correcting that now. But the first one is that the space that we believe is empty is not really so empty. It's full of a living essence, of a living material that we're only beginning to understand, number one. And number two, the fact, and it is a fact now, that we may have experiences inside of our bodies that influence the world beyond our bodies through the conduit of what's in this space. So it was in going into the monasteries and the nunneries and speaking with the indigenous people, looking at them eye to eye, heart to heart, God to God, and I could say to these people, when you just performed that miracle, when you just performed that miraculous healing, what is it that you did inside of your body to make that happen? And if I didn't understand what they told me, I'd ask them again and again and again through the translators until I understood that they were creating an experience, producing an effect inside of their bodies that my science never told me was possible or existed. And that was the path that led me. I just want to emphasize, science is good. And I believe our science is good and served us well. It simply is incomplete. And so it was that path that allowed me to flesh out the missing pieces that we're only beginning to understand today, marrying the best science of our time with the wisdom, 5,000 years of wisdom of our past, into a greater understanding. And that understanding brings us right back to the question. That's a long answer to a short question. But it brings us back to where we're only now beginning to understand that there is something that we can do in our lives that influence not only the physical body, ours and those of other people around us, but literally influence the physical reality of our world, and that changes everything. It changes everything that we in the West believe about ourselves. So as a scientist, I've also come to understand this is a very different way for many people to think about themselves and their world. And I've found that there's a learning curve that our audiences and our friends and families and coworkers in my career at the Water Fountain, this is not something that people typically talk about in a technical organization. They don't wake up in the morning and say, what kinds of feelings, what kinds of dreams, what kinds of healings did you have over the weekend? And they're talking about who won the football game and who won the lotteries. But this is where it brings us, the relevance in our lives, because we all are having experiences every day. Whether we are consciously aware of it or not, those experiences are physically affecting our bodies and our world. What Western science now is beginning to understand, only in the last years of the 20th and now the first years of the 21st century, it is now a scientific fact that the space between things is anything but empty. It is full of a living, pulsating essence that is so new scientists have yet to agree on a single term. Some are calling it a quantum hologram, very technical sounding name. Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the former Apollo astronaut, I've had the honor of sharing the stage with him a number of times. He calls it nature's mind. Stephen Hawking calls it the mind of God. Others simply call it the field. In 1944, the father of quantum physics, Max Planck, identified the existence of this field, and he called it the matrix. He said, underlying everything that we see, our bodies included, everything we see in the world around us in our bodies, he said, there is the existence of what must be a conscious and intelligent mind. This is his language in 1944. He said that this mind is the matrix of all matter, and it's from his work that the movie series began and many of the ideas that we have today. So what we know is this, is that we have the opportunity to influence that field in ways now that we're only beginning to understand. It's done through the human heart. It's not a thinking process. Thoughts are important. But the ancients made a distinction between thoughts and feelings and emotions. And it's the feelings that are centered in our heart, what are called coherent, heart-based emotions. We know that when we feel a feeling of love, compassion, understanding, forgiveness, when we change the self-esteem, that there's an effect from that it changes the electrical and the magnetic fields in our heart, and that those fields literally change the stuff that our world is made of around our bodies. Our hearts are the strongest magnetic field in our bodies, and our hearts are the strongest electrical field in our bodies, much more so than the brain. While the brain does create those kinds of fields, the heart is many times stronger. And what the science now is showing is that when you can change the field that the atom is in, you change the atom, and we're made of those atoms. So when we have feelings in our hearts, we're changing the field that connects the stuff everything is made of, and we literally are altering our physical reality in ways that sound miraculous in Western science. But again, this is the great secret everyone knows except us, because Western science has only arrived at this understanding. You go to these ancient and indigenous traditions and cultures, it's where they begin. They begin with the understanding, sure, everything's connected, and sure, we're part of it. And then they take us one step further, and they say, here, I'll show you. I'll show you how to create the effects in your body so that you can heal your body, and you can heal the bodies of others. You can change your self-esteem, and your body will mirror that change. It doesn't have to be a long, slow, drawn-out process. It can happen very, very quickly. It can happen in a matter of minutes. We have video documentation from medicineless hospitals in Beijing, China, for example, where they understand these practices, and they've employed them for several thousand years. And we can look into the body of a living woman with a cancerous tumor that Western science says is inoperable. And then we can watch as three practitioners that understand the language of human emotion. They create the feeling in their bodies. They're not looking at that tumor as an illness. They see that woman as whole, healthy, vital, completely enabled, fully capacitated. And as they feel that feeling strongly among themselves, her physical body mirrors that. And we can see it through sonograms. We can see that tumor disappear in less than 3 minutes. And that's how quickly reality can change. And this is where the disconnect comes in with Western science. Because I've shared this information with scientists and medical doctors all over the world, and they say, wow, that's a miracle. We're going to have to come back and study this, and we will as soon as we find a cure for cancer, or as soon as we find the cure to cure on the mechanical level, what they see as a mechanical process. And what we now know is our physical body is the outpicturing, is the mirror of something that is not so physical. And this is where science now is only arriving. The three practitioners in the medicineless hospital in Beijing did not judge that cancerous tumor. They didn't judge it right, wrong, good, or bad. They said it's a quantum possibility, and there are many possibilities. Of course, this is just one. They said, now we're going to choose another one. But this is subtle and very, very different way of looking at things, because they acknowledge what is and invite a new possibility rather than having a charge on what is there and feeling that somehow we have to manipulate or cut out, in the case of a tumor, or change, hammer the physical reality into submission. What they're doing is acknowledging that moment, that example, and they're changing it on the level of what we would call the quantum blueprint. They're feeling the feeling as if another possibility has occurred, and in doing so, allowing that possibility to replace the one that exists without judging the one that exists. I worked, I was an aerospace engineer in Denver, Colorado during the last years of the Cold War, the 1980s, and it was when the famous brown cloud was inundating Denver, and we couldn't all drive on the same days. We had to carpool on different days. And one day I went to an engineer friend's house to do my carpool for that week, and I got there a little early. And I'd never been to his house before, and I said, "Can I use your bathroom?" And I went in there, and he had little Post-it notes of affirmations all over the bathroom, and it said, "My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now." We got in his car, and he had little Post-it notes all over the dashboard and the rearview mirror. "My perfect mate is manifesting for me now." And, of course, I knew what his office looked like, and it was the same way. He had them all over the walls in the CRT. I said, "Does this affirmation work for you?" He said, "Nah." He said, "Never does." And I said, "Why do you think that is?" And he said, well, look at me. Who'd want to be with somebody like me? I'm just an engineer. You know, he had a very low self-esteem about himself. And I began to think about the way that he was applying those affirmations, and other people have applied them very successfully. And what I found the difference was, for him, it was a thought process that never went beyond what was happening in his mind, in his own picturing, his own self-esteem. And the thought is important. The ancients are very clear about this in the Sanskrit text. They tell us that the thought is the image of the quantum possibility. So in other words, in the realm of all possibilities, everything already exists. My friend's perfect relationship and the worst one he'll ever have. The lightest of the light, the darkest of the dark. Our greatest healing and our greatest suffering, they're already there. And what they invite us to do in these ancient traditions is to reach into those possibilities with our mind. This is the power of the mind. And isolate, we lock in one of those possibilities. So now we have taken it and identified it. However, to bring it into this world, to breathe life into that possibility, is the power of human emotion, our love for that possibility, or our fear of that possibility. Either one will work. To bring that quantum possibility into the particle reality of our everyday lives. We don't have to know that. It sounds very technical. We just have a feeling. But this is the science of, appears to be the science of how these things are working. So this is why our self-esteem is so important. When we feel, when my engineer friend felt that, why would anybody want to be with me, is what he said to me. The affirmation for him was an empty affirmation. It was a thought that had no energy to invite it into this world. And an example of just the opposite of that is I know of other people who have simply made a list of all of the attributes of a perfect partner in life, because this is what many people, I'm using as an example. It works in healing, it works in peace, but we're talking about relationships. They make a list of all those attributes, and then they come from the place that relationship is already happening. What is their life like? How is their life different now that perfect partner is there? How is their evening different? How do they spend their time differently? How do they feel when they wake up in the morning and share their lives with someone? And it's those feelings that they live throughout the day. It's not something you sit down and do for a minute and then you get up and walk away. Rather, it's something that we become. We live our lives as if these experiences have already happened, and in that way we invite them into our lives, and they happen frighteningly quickly for some people. It's amazing. I know people that haven't finished their list, and they go out for lunch or a cup of coffee while they're making the list, and the person that just brought them their lunch is the person that's on that list, and they fall in love and they're married 20 years later. I know people that's happened to. So it's about clarity. It's about specificity. It's about being personal. Being very clear that these are personal desires. Scientifically, it appears that this field, the divine matrix, it is a mirror and a bridge between our inner and our outer worlds. And it can only give us what we give it to work with. And the interesting thing is that we have been conditioned to feel the feelings of the things that we don't want in life and that we're afraid of. We wake up in the morning and we see the 6 o'clock news and all the things to be afraid of, and then we go through our day saying, oh, I hope I'm not going to see that today, or I hope it's not around the corner. And my question, so fascinating me, where do we learn to feel the things that we don't want rather than things that we choose to have? And how would our lives be different if we could cut through all of the static and simply choose in our lives what we would like each moment of each day, or our relationships, or our abundance, or our careers, or the peace in our families to look like? What would what would our lives look like if we could do that? And there's very good scientific evidence showing precisely what our lives would look like because we would very quickly experience everything that we've created. As a scientist, one of the first things I had to understand, and again, my training, I was trained in the hard sciences, and there was no allowance for any inner experience to have an effect on our outer world to begin with. Number two, I was raised in a relatively conservative community in the Midwest. I was born in Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri. Excuse me. In that part of the world, when you talk about emotions, they kind of get lumped into this nebulous experience. So, thoughts, feelings, emotions are all the same thing. We really don't talk about them much. And by the way, as a male, we don't want to see much of yours. So that was my upbringing. So I began to understand when we go into the other cultures, and I'm referring again and again to this wisdom. We had this wisdom in Western cultures, and it was lost in the 4th century. About 1,700 years ago, it was edited right out of our most cherished spiritual and religious traditions, the biblical edits of the 4th century. It was not edited from the other cultures that we have visited, and that's the value of going into these cultures. And they identify 3 separate yet related experiences that we all have in our bodies, and they literally call them thought, feeling, and emotion. And here's the difference. The thinking they identify with the 3 upper energy centers of the body. The Sanskrit traditions have a 7 energy center or 7 chakra system that they work with. And they say the upper 3 are related to what we call thought or logic processes. So when we think about something, we picture it in our mind, that perfect relationship or peace between nations. But we can only invite it into our lives when we breathe the power of emotion into that thought. The emotion comes from the lower 3 of those creative centers in our bodies. So when we breathe the power of emotion into our thought, we imbue that thought with life. And those 2 energies meet in the one center that is not accounted for yet in our model. It's in our heart, or what scientists call the 7-layer liquid crystal oscillator in the center of our chest. But we'll just call it our heart, because that's what it does. Our heart is creating electrical and magnetic waves that are influencing the world around us based on what we think and the emotion that we breathe into those thoughts to create the feeling. So now we've just defined feeling. Feeling, by definition, from the Sanskrit tradition, is the union of thought and emotion. It creates the feeling. Now what makes this really interesting is that those traditions say we are capable of only 2 primary emotions: love and whatever we feel the opposite of love is. And when you get really deep into the teachings, there are 2 aspects of the same thing. But what they say is when we have our thought, we are either breathing the love of that thought or our fear of that thought to create the feeling, and the feeling then becomes sadness or joy or compassion or anger. Those are not emotions, those are feelings. Now, for some people, they say, well, you're nitpicking. What difference could it make? And these are the subtle differences between these ancient ways of viewing this inner technology. It's literally a technology, because we can have the same thought or the same affirmation and imbue it with a different emotion and have completely different feelings and create a different outcome. And this is the great secret that was edited out of our Christian and pre-Christian, Judeo-Christian traditions. When 45 books were removed in the 4th century, 20 were taken out completely. Another 25 were condensed and rearranged. And we know this because we found the information now in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, the Coptic, the Gnostic texts. So we know what those texts would have said if we had had them. But the interesting thing is, without those texts, we tend to rely upon the written word, the validation, to feel that power in our bodies. I think everyone senses or suspects that there's an untapped potential in the human body. I've been on every continent of the earth, and I've asked every audience I've ever been in, do you feel that that's there? And they say, yes, we feel there's something there, but we just can't quite get it. Why is that? So we have a feeling that there's more to us, but we rely on a written validation in a 5,000-year-old text or a scientific study to tell us that it's true. And this is, I think, the value of going into those texts, is we get to see the words that literally say, in the Gospel of Thomas, the lost Gospel of Thomas, it literally says, when these 2 become one, when thought and emotion become one, then you'll say to the mountain, move, and the mountain will move. And I used to think that that was a metaphor. And I now have seen enough to know that moving a cancerous tumor inside the body of a living woman, that's moving a mountain to me. And it's all done from marrying thought and emotion together. In 1998, I had my first journey into the highlands of central China and Tibet. And it was during that time we were given a personal audience with an abbot, who's an elderly leader of a particular sect in the monastery. And this abbot passed just a couple of years ago, so I'm glad that we spoke with him when we did. And it was this man, I asked the question that I asked every monk, every nun, I asked the shaman in Peru and Bolivia, that I had the clearest response from this man. And I asked him a question. I said, when we see your prayers on the outside, and we see you in the chanting hall for 12, 16, 18 hours a day, and we see the bells and the bowls and the mudras and the mantras and the gongs and the chimes and the incense, when we see your prayers on the outside, I said, what are you doing on the inside? And this was the man that looked at me. He said, you've never seen our prayers, because a prayer cannot be seen. He said, what you see are the things we do to create the feeling in our body, and the feeling is the prayer. And then he turned the question on me, and he said, how do you do this in your culture? Through a translator. And I began to think about this and realize that when we lost the words in our most cherished spiritual traditions that tell us that feeling is a language that speaks to our bodies in this world, and we lost the words that validated that, we began to think that the words themselves were the prayers, and if we say, or the affirmations, and if we say those words the right number of times, the right time of day or the right time of year, that we've said our prayer or our affirmation, and then if it doesn't work, we get frustrated and we say, well, my prayer didn't work, or my affirmation's not working for me, because we lost the link with feeling and emotion. When I was in the monasteries in Tibet, and the abbot had passed, a new abbot took his place, who was already in his mid-80s. He's the new young abbot. He's already in his mid-80s. And I asked him a question, and this was in 2005, we just went back. And I asked him a question, and I said, what is the force in your tradition, in your belief system? What is the force that connects the universe? What's the force that holds everything together? And through the translator, he answered me with one word. And I thought I heard it incorrectly. And I said, would you do that again? And he came back and he answered me with one word, and he said, compassion. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, is compassion a force that holds everything together, or is it a feeling that we experience in our bodies? And he said, yes. And that was very powerful for me to understand that, because it says that we have the ability to feel in our bodies the stuff that holds this universe together. And we're really not so different from those quantum particles in the stars beyond us, or in the tumor that's in front of us, in the suffering of our loved ones, or in the peace between the nations. It's all part of the same thing. The challenge is to make it more than an intellectual exercise. How do we know we're part of all that is? One of the ways that helped me come to that realization, there was an experiment that was done in 1997 in Geneva, Switzerland. Made world headlines. 3,500 reporters from the science journals were there. They documented this experiment, and it didn't make the cover of Time magazine or USA Today, although I think it should have. And what the experiment showed, the bottom line, was that when you take the stuff our world is made of, a particle of matter, one particle, and even if you split that particle and send each portion to different locations, which is what this experiment did. They split one particle of matter and sent one particle 7 miles this direction, the other 7 miles that direction. They were 14 miles apart. And even though they were separated physically, they were still connected energetically. So that when one particle had an experience, they would disturb one particle, the other one acted like it was having the experience. Sometimes the other one would act like it was having the experience before the scientist even disturbed the first particle. And it's mind-boggling. He said, well, how can this be? But what this tells us is that once matter is physically joined, even when it becomes separate, the energy is still there that's connecting it. And this is why it's important to me, because if we go back far enough in time, all the particles of matter of this entire universe that are expanding were all meshed together in a single particle about the size of a green pea, is what scientists tell us today. It's what the computer models suggest. That if you could go into the universe today and take all the particles of matter and take out all the space in between and bring it together and compress it into a size of a single green pea, it means that you and me and every one of our listeners, we were all once part of that same particle that creates this whole universe today. And even though those particles are now separate and expanding, and the studies show that they are, energetically we're all still linked. When we lost the information telling us we're a part of all that we see, we found ourselves on a very technological path without the wisdom of us being in the equation. So we thought that's the world out there and that we're separate from that world. Now what's happened is our technology has come so far that our very existence is threatened by the technology that we've developed, whether it's the wars or the viruses or the climate change. So I believe we've come full circle now to survive our time in history. We've got to write ourselves back into the equation. Our prayers, our affirmations, our beliefs, our language. And when they're spoken through the language of the heart, they have a direct, powerful, and immediate impact on our bodies and the world around us. And it invites us to be very, very aware of what it is that we truly hold in our hearts as the truth of our world, because we live that in our lives, from the lightest of the light to the darkest of the dark, the greatest fears and the greatest joys. What we're beginning to understand is that human emotion and feeling and belief is literally a language. It's a non-verbal language that this field recognizes and understands. And the field works in what we call real time. It doesn't know about a few minutes from now. So if you say in your affirmation, 20 minutes from now, I'd like for my perfect mate to manifest for me now, it doesn't know about 20 minutes from now. It is a real-time application. And this is why the key, and this is what the ancients say, and this is what the monks and the nuns tell us real-time today. They say to be very specific about what it is that we're choosing to have in our lives, because what we're doing, and it helps if we understand this, what we're doing is in the world of quantum possibility, in the soup, the nebulous soup of all possibilities, what we're doing is we're isolating, we're locking one into place. And if we're not specific about what that possibility is, then how can the field be specific about what it is that it gives to us? Whatever it takes to get us to the point where we can transcend the limits, the laws of physics and biology as we've known them in the past. We have a power within us that transcends those laws, that we're more than our mistakes, that we're more than the suffering, we're more than the limits that we believed in the past. And that is where I say, wow, that really inspires me.
Check, check, 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. My parents are what I consider to be metaphysicians. They attended religious science and unity churches and were big advocates of using affirmations, visualization, and prayer to create their reality. And one of my most memorable experiences was when our family automobile went kerplunk. I mean, it just died. It was an Opel station wagon, and my dad decided he wanted to get a Ford Pinto. Now, don't ask me why. You can get whatever thing you want using your thoughts. But for some reason, he had his heart set on buying a Ford Pinto. So he went to the local toy store and got a little Hot Wheels die-cast model of a Ford Pinto. And he painted it brown because he wanted a brown Pinto. That's his favorite color. Again, don't ask me why. And he put the little Hot Wheels model Ford Pinto on our family television set, dragged my little brother and I out of our bedrooms, and the four of us sat there every day, and we looked at that little Pinto, and he had us visualize it being real, sitting outside in our driveway, and he had us not only visualize it, but using our entire body. He had us picture what it would feel like to sit in the car, to smell the new car smell, to hear that roar of the four-cylinder Pinto engine. And he had us just imagine every day that we owned this car. We had no idea how we were going to pay for it. But somehow, because of this process, we owned that car within about 2 months. I mean, it wasn't like a skyhook dropped it on our driveway. So I grew up with these lessons that, if you want something, just visualize it, and there it is. And as I said, visualization was a misnomer for us because we'd use our entire body. We would feel how we would imagine it to feel. We would smell it, we would taste it, use our whole senses. And we would do this as a family together, and miracles happened. My parents tell me the story that they were married 7 years and couldn't conceive a child, so they went to the local religious science church and put in a prayer request to conceive, and I was conceived within a month later. So I was born in this sense that prayers and thoughts and visualizations created me and your reality. And I don't know any different. What I do remember is the 1960s being made terribly fun of for talking this way. I remember saying the word manifestation at school one day and the kids all rolling their eyes and going, "There she goes again." And so I kept it inside. It was something I did only with my closest friends and family. And I remember that if I wanted something, like when I was a teenager, I wanted to quit smoking. I'd taken up smoking to be cool and fit in, and then I got hooked. And I remember my mom and I praying over it, and I completely lost the desire to smoke and having experiences like that. We have always used affirmative prayers. So there's two types of prayers. One is supplication, where you beg for something. And one is affirmative, which means you thank God in the present tense for what you're asking for that seems to be in the future. So, thank you, God, that I have a wonderful soulmate relationship. Thank you, God, that I have this perfect health. My husband and I recently used this prayer to manifest a wonderful home. And our prayer was, thank you, God, for this beautiful home that we love so much and easily afford. And boy, we sure got that house easily. Unfortunately, my first marriage was very difficult. I was married to a man who decided to control me by telling me how awful I was. And I believed him for a long time. And my self-esteem just plummeted when I was a young mother. And I didn't really think very highly of myself. I had no confidence. And I didn't think that I could do anything in the world except for be a wonderful mother to my two sons, which I think is an important purpose. But there was something more. I knew that there was something else I was supposed to do. And so I would pray all the time, tell me my life purpose. And every time I would pray that, I would get visions of myself on television and on stages teaching people. And to me, that seemed like science fiction, because what could I, this person who didn't have any confidence, possibly teach anyone? And yet I kept getting these visions to go give speeches, and I didn't know how to do it. What I later learned is that we don't have to worry about how to put our visions or our dreams into reality. All we have to do is follow the guidance that we get one step at a time. So what happened was, one day I was eating ice cream and thinking I was happy, but I got this moment of truth that, my gosh, I'm not happy. I'm in a self-made hell, a prison of my own making, and I didn't know how to get out of it. So I remember getting very humble and getting down on my knees and saying to God, I don't know what to do. You keep showing me these visions that I'm supposed to be a speaker. I don't think I'm qualified. I don't know how to make that happen, but if you'll show me how, I'll follow it. And that was all it took, because right away I got clear signals of what action steps to take. And it was me surrendering that desire to control everything or predict how my dreams would come about. Once I surrendered, then I was told very clearly, go to college. And I thought, how am I going to go to college? I have no money. I have these two little boys. I don't have time or money. And so what I heard very clearly is, go call the guidance counselor. They'll help you. So I called the local college guidance counselor, went in there not knowing how I was going to go to college, but that I was supposed to, and then I just promised God that I would follow whatever I was told to do. And they helped me to get some student loans. And so the student loans allowed me to get childcare and go to school, and I went to school very part-time in the beginning, but eventually I was able to get my associate's degree in psychology, which allowed me to get a job as a counselor at a local alcohol and drug counseling center. And then what my next assignment was to start writing books. Well, I thought this was enough just to go to college, but the assignments kept coming one step at a time. And for some reason I got it in my head that I was going to be published by Bantam. And so I went around the house and I cut out all the little bantam roosters out of my old paperback bantam books and put them all around the house, and I started visualizing my name on the spine of a book with a little bantam rooster. And my third book was published by Bantam, and just like my visualization, I first saw the book at a bookstore. There it was, name on the spine, little bantam rooster. And so things like that have happened my entire life. It's not enough just to ask. It's not enough just to have positive thoughts. You've got to follow the guidance you get as a result. Sometimes people tell me that they feel like their prayers are being ignored, or that they're just spinning their wheels in mud. Always these are the folks who are ignoring seemingly inconsequential little bits of inner guidance that are asking them to do something. And because the universe gives us little baby steps, one step at a time, it's often unrecognized when you're told to go read a book, take a class, call someone, write a letter. But if we do step A, then we're given the next set of instructions, step B. Then we're given the next set of instructions, step C, and it takes us step by step to where we're going. There are some people that I've met who unfortunately seem to romanticize pain, or even worse, think that it's God's doing, God's will to have pain. And that's just not my belief. My belief is that God's will for us is to have health, prosperity, abundance, love, harmony. And yes, there are challenges in life that we all go through, and there's no shame with that, but it's what you do with the challenges that counts. And we can always find some blessings, some lessons in every challenge, but please, let's not wallow in them or accept them as our lot in life. Let's learn from them, grow, and move on. And what I do is I've always written books about them, hoping that I can help someone else out of whatever quagmire I just got through. And so my challenge has been in some relationships where I've been forced to say goodbye to a couple of really dear friends who just couldn't seem to get out of that victim mentality. And I couldn't, unfortunately, stay there with them. I still love them, but I just couldn't sit there and listen to problems day after day after day, because it affects you to be around folks who want to go on and on about how they're victims. I found that I would come home from lunches with them or getting off the phone with them, and I would feel depressed, and I would feel guilty, and I would feel heavy, and then I would start to attract those things. So unfortunately, we just can't afford to hang out with folks who are in that space a lot. If we do, we have to almost go in there with a shield and really stay strong, and hopefully we can lift them up. But if we can't, unfortunately, sometimes on the spiritual path, you part ways. Well, I remember when I was single, I was a divorcee, and I was traveling around giving workshops, and I started to feel very sorry for myself. And I was looking around at couples that were happy and kissing, going, oh, how come God loves them more? How come I can't have a soulmate? And then I caught myself affirming in the negative like that. Why can't I have love? Why don't I have love? And feeling jealous of other people. And once I caught it, I realized what I was doing, because I was making a prayer to not have a soulmate by affirming that I didn't, or by being jealous of others. So that's when I got really clear that, hey, wait a minute, I deserve a soulmate. When you get that clarity and that anger on behalf of yourself, the universe just moves quickly on your behalf. And it's not that they're afraid of your anger, it's because you got clear. When I was wishy-washy about wanting a soulmate, I got wishy-washy results. I got, well, here's a guy that's sort of okay, and maybe this guy can piece these two men together and have my soulmate. This guy writes poetry, and this guy has a good job, so put them together, I got a soulmate. But when I got clear, right away it happened. And it's not like my doorbell rang and in walked Stephen. It was guidance. This is how it's worked for me. Every time I've visualized or affirmed, I get this inner roadmap given to me in the form of gut feelings that are repetitive, that urge me to take action, or visions. In this case, I got all of that plus signs that told me to go to yoga class. And the signs were in the form of people, without me asking, giving me DVDs and pamphlets about yoga. And I had never wanted to go to yoga. I wasn't talking about yoga, but all of a sudden everybody that I knew was handing me pamphlets for yoga classes. I didn't put two and two together that this was how the universe was going to deliver my soulmate, But what I did see was that the universe wanted me to go to yoga. So I went to yoga, and I have to admit, I was kicking and screaming in the beginning. I thought, what do you wear? What do you do? I'm going to feel out of place. And I went there, and the second class, I looked over, and there's this cute guy with these blazing blue eyes next to me. My heart went boom. And I went, okay, maybe this is why I'm at yoga class. And a little over a year later, we started dating. And on the second date, we did that talk, where'd you grow up, where'd you go to school? And I was floored, and so was he, when we found out we were next-door neighbors. When we were kids, he was our paper boy that I'd had a huge crush on when I was a little girl. And we hadn't recognized each other, but I'd fallen in love with the same guy twice. He is clearly my soulmate. I got what I was looking for. But this is what I tell people who are looking for their soulmate or anything that they're manifesting. It's not enough just to ask. It's not enough just to have positive thoughts. You've got to follow the guidance you get as a result. True guidance is always filled with this sense, this aura and feeling of warmth and love. Now, you might feel intimidated by what you're being asked to do, and it might feel intimidating, but false guidance has this sneaky, getting away from it, edgy feel to it. So you want to watch out for that. If you hear guidance, it's always in the second person voicing. So it always says, go exercise outside, quit drinking, go read this book. Where false guidance has that I, me, egotistical sense to the sentences. Where it's talking to you about, I might fail. What if I can't do this? What if people laugh at me? The old energy of this planet is leaving, thank goodness. And the old energy is competition and greed. This belief that I've got to get mine before they get theirs. And the new energy that we're coming into is manifestation and cooperation. And the more of us that learn how to manifest, we're all going to bring peace to earth, one person at a time that way. The vision that the angels show me of the future is just beautiful. They show me that we will stop going to jobs that don't matter. We'll stop making meaningless objects that we spend money on because we feel empty inside. And we're going to be following our personal passions. And there'll be self-employment or cooperative employment where you're working together on a collective passion. There'll be more meaning in all of our lives. And the way that we do that is by trusting our inner guidance, that you can be fully supported by the universe by following your dreams and your passions and your inner guidance.
Good. Louise Hayfilm, Cheryl Richardson interview, take one.
Very good.
So early on in my life, probably in my early to mid-20s, I was living like a lot of people do, fairly unconsciously, but not aware of my unconsciousness, just kind of going through life and often feeling as though life was happening to me, that I was a victim to what was going on in my life, or that the places in my life where I was unhappy, whether it was in a relationship or where I was living or in my job, had nothing to do with, had less to do with what I was doing and more to do with just sort of the circumstances of life. And I started to be introduced to looking at the world in a different way. For example, through Louise's book, You Can Heal Your Life, which was very influential to me early on. What a lot of people don't know, I actually have as a side story, a funny little story about Louise that nobody really knows. And that is that when I was probably 24 or 25 years old, I volunteered for an organization called Interface in Cambridge, Mass. That was considered the East Coast Esalen. You may remember that. And it's a place where people like Deepak Chopra would come, and Bernie Siegel, got his sort of start there. And I was volunteering there, and I was volunteering because I was really interested in this whole self-help field, and recovery was a big thing at the time. And Louise Hay was coming to speak for Interface. She was coming to a hall in downtown Boston, and I had read You Can Heal Your Life. And I was really taken by two things. Number one, the fact that she was teaching from her own experience, and she was so honest about her life in the book. I was really engaged by that. but also the practical nature of the book, that you could actually do something with it. You know, you could look up and see, oh, I have this physical ailment, and therefore this might be going on. And I appreciated the the fact that it was interactive. And so I was really taken by her work. And so I asked if I could be the volunteer that would drive to the airport to pick her up and to take her back to the hall. Now, nobody knows this. It's really ironic, actually. Here I am today, a Hay House author and a speaker, and Louise doesn't even know this. She probably doesn't even remember, but I remember driving to the airport. It was in the dead of winter, and it was freezing. And, you know, so this is one of the first people who has really touched my life in a significant way and has begun the opening to the belief that, wow, maybe there's something more to life than meets the eye. Like maybe there's something that I'm doing in my life that's creating what's happening and not just the fact that life is happening to me. So I drive to the airport. It's freezing cold. I get there, and of course her flight is delayed. And it's delayed for about 3 hours. And I sit in the airport, you know, as this like young, excited fan, you know, who just can't wait to meet her. And I'm, you know, every time they say, you know, the flight will be in 20 minutes, I'm like, okay, and I'm fixing myself and hoping that I look really smart and hoping that I don't look too eager, although I'm sure I just look like a bumbling idiot just waiting like this little girl. And I remember the flight finally came. It was probably at 1 o'clock in the morning, and she had long hair, and she came down the jetway, you know, she was walking down the jetway, and I was watching her, and she came out like a queen. And I sat there speechless, like, I can't believe this is really Louise Hay, and I'm going to meet her. And, you know, she's looking around, and I'm just so taken by her that I forget that I'm supposed to stand up and go, hi, I'm your volunteer. And eventually I did that, and she was very gracious and got in the car and drove her back, and then went to pick her up at the hotel the next night to take her to the venue where she was going to speak. And I just remember she just had such a presence about her way back then that she still has today. And that night when I heard her speak, that, along with some other events that occurred during that time, was the awakening when I thought, wow, there's something about the way I think that may be influencing what's happening in my life. And so somebody had said to me, and I don't remember who it was some teacher, had talked about how, you know, there is this power greater than us at work in the world. And, you know, one of the ways you can test it is, one of the ways you can test how our thinking partners with this greater power, and in that partnership, we can manifest things in our life. And one of the ways you can test it is very simple. Just take a little yellow sticky note and write down 2 or 3 things that you'd really like to have in your life. And then keep that sticky note in view so that you see it all the time. You don't focus on it too hard, but you just keep it in your consciousness. And so I thought, yeah, this is a bunch of baloney, but I'll give it a try. I'm willing to try anything. So I take the little yellow sticky note and I write. I specifically write out, because they said you have to be very specific about what you want, don't be general. So I write exactly the kind of computer that I wanted. I was a young writer, you know, and wanted, back then it was a big deal to get a computer with a word processor on, you know, a word processor on it. And so I specifically wrote the kind of computer and the kind of software and the kind of word processor that I wanted. And then I put down that I wanted to travel. And this person had said, by the way, if there's certain things you want, make sure you put the word free in front of them, like make it fun. So I wrote free travel. And there was a third thing, I don't remember what it was, but this was in November. About a month later, for Christmas, my boss at the time, I was working for an entrepreneur as an administrative assistant, my boss gave me the exact computer that I had written down on the yellow sticky note as a Christmas gift. And I remember when I opened the box and I saw what it was, and I saw it happened to be something I had worked on, a system I had worked on for him, and I saw what he had given me, I thought, oh my God, what if this actually works? And then I went, nah, it can't possibly, it's just a coincidence. And I said, the heck with it, and, you know, threw it away. But then 2 weeks later, a dear friend of mine who worked for a large Fortune 50 company called me and said, hey, guess what? I won the top salesperson award in my company, and it's a free trip to Boca Raton to stay in the presidential suite of the Boca Raton Resort Hotel. Now, I didn't even know where Boca Raton was. But she said, you know, I can bring a guest with me, want to come with me. It won't cost anything, and we'll get to stay in the presidential suite. And that's when I went, okay, give me that little sticky note again. Maybe there's something to this, you know. And sure enough, and that was a very powerful experience for me. I've since grown up a lot since then, and I don't see the universe as Santa Claus where you just sort of write things down and they happen. There's a lot more to it than that. However, it was my commitment to be awake, to become more conscious, and my willingness to actually think about what I wanted. That experience gave me a visceral sense of what it was like to be the master of my own destiny instead of feeling like the victim, or instead of feeling like I was at the effect of the world. Maybe I had something to do with this as well. And so, many, many years later, I'm 20, 25 years older, and I realized that the gift of that little sticky note was the recognition, the spark of recognition that I have a lot more to do with what happens in my life and in the lives of the people around me than I ever realized. And therefore, I need to be very responsible about that power, and it's my duty to use it. Some of the challenges I see with the purple. Some of the challenges I see with purple.
I have lots of issues.
Purple really bothers me, okay? There's something about purple. Don't get me started, because I'll do a whole Saturday Night Live riff. Thank you. Okay, I get it. Okay. That was great. Some of the challenges that people are faced with are the same kinds of things, same challenges I've been faced with. Impatience, a lack of clarity. So let's start there with a lack of clarity. Most of us think in generalities. I hate my job, I want a new job. Okay, that's great. That's a great place to start. But what are you looking for? Like getting specific, knowing what you want. A lot of people know what they don't want, but they don't necessarily know what they want. So really taking the time to clarify what it is you want, like really investing the time in that. It's amazing to me. We're so busy that we don't really put a lot of time and energy into really sitting down and saying, what's working in my life? What isn't? What do I want to change? And then specifically looking at what I want to change. So clarity, and then another obstacle is just not knowing what to do. Like a lot of times, we're missing information about what the next step might be in terms of the action equation of affirmations plus actions equals miracles, right? A lot of times we're missing information about what to do, how to take action, but we call it something else, like I must be afraid, that's why I'm stuck, or I'm sabotaging my success, that's a big one. That's why, my intentions aren't happening for me, or that's why I'm stuck. I have a fear of success. That's why I'm stuck. When really, a lot of times, it's quite simple. People just don't know what to do next. That's where the profession of coaching has been so helpful, because if you say to me, you want to write a book, believe me, you're going to talk to me about, how you're afraid you have nothing important to say, or it's all been said before, and you think that's what's keeping you stuck. But the truth is, you don't know that, I have to write a book proposal. Great. What does that look like? Oh, you know what? There's a book out there called How to Write the Perfect Book Proposal. And if you read it, it will show you what it looks like. And then you can actually do it. What I've found that's so wonderful and resilient and encouraging and inspiring about humanity is we will take actions when someone just helps us to know what it is we need to do. And another important obstacle, I think, is isolation. We're lonely. And we need each other. We came to this planet together for a reason. And I think it's a lack of support and an inability to ask for help that often keeps us stuck. So you may have an intention, I want to write a book. You finally get the information about what it is you need to do, but then you get scared along the way, because we get scared. And who's there to hold your hand or to say, you know what, it's okay. Yes, you can do this. Just like let's break it down into an even smaller step so that you stay moving in the right direction instead of allowing yourself to be stuck. And, by the way, don't go to the hardware store for milk. Make sure you turn to people for support who are really going to support you. Because a lot of us, when we start doing those things to honor our soul or to express our creativity, those are really vulnerable acts. The things that we intend or that we affirm for our lives are those things that are deeply important to our soul, and so they're vulnerable. And too often we turn to people who just squash them, or who tell you why it isn't going to work, or why that's a crazy affirmation, or that's a crazy intention. That's called going to the hardware store for milk. You want to go to the people who are really going to hold your hand on the journey and say, hey, I'm right there with you. So those are some of the obstacles. So in my life, I would say I can't say the first half of my life because who knows where I am in it, but probably the first 30 30 or so years of my life, most of my spiritual growth was around relationships. I actually find that to be true for a lot of people, that it's our relationships, particularly our romantic or intimate relationships, where we get challenged the most early on. And so a lot of I would often choose men, I would often fall in love with a man's potential and then have a relationship with the dream of that relationship. So I would literally be in relationship with the dream of what it could be instead of the reality of what it was. And that's like probably the most prevalent theme throughout all of my early relationships. And the gift of them, the gift of every single person I was ever involved with, and I see all of them as spiritual change agents today, is that they really forced me to grow. You know, there were the painful relationships with the men who weren't emotionally available, and I thought for sure, you know, they couldn't feel their feelings, and they couldn't be there for me emotionally until, you know, a therapist said to me, did it ever occur to you that maybe you can't feel your feelings and you can't be there emotionally for people? And that was a whole new concept for me. And, you know, and so that man who, quote, couldn't feel his feelings became a catalyst for me looking at my own inability to do that. And so a lot of my relationships were unbalanced as well. A lot of times I would choose partners who weren't ready for their own commitment to consciousness like I was, and I was trying to get them on board, which was a really arrogant and inappropriate thing to do, but I didn't know it at the time. I thought I was being helpful, and, you know, controlling looked like helpful and loving. And so I reached a point in my life, I mean, the truth was I was really afraid of being alone. And so I would rather be in a relationship that wasn't fulfilling than be alone. You know, like a lot of women, I grew up, you know, from generations of women where it wasn't okay to be alone. And so when I finally had enough therapy under my belt and enough healing under my belt where I said, you know what, something tells me I better be alone for a while if I'm going to find a good relationship, and I finally got my own apartment and moved in and dealt with all of the discomfort of that in the beginning, and then over time began to fall in love with myself and my own place. And then I started to think about meeting a partner, and I started to, you know, face the reality that I was lonely in a different way and that I wanted someone to share my life with. You know, by that point, so this is around 33 or 34, I had a clear history of having intentions, having affirmations, taking actions, and watching miracles unfold in my life. I mean, I have a million examples of how that happened in very powerful ways. And I write a lot about those experiences. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to take this and I'm going to craft myself a great partner. And I spent 7 days writing about exactly the kind of man I'd like to meet, his physical qualities, intellectual, where he was at financially in his life, spiritually, all the way down to I hope he loves dogs, and, you know, I hope he has dark hair and dark eyes, because I'm so attracted to men with dark hair and dark eyes. My prayer is always, you know, to God, please allow this or something greater to occur. You know, please, if this isn't in my highest and best interest, that's okay. Don't let it happen then. You know, but please may this or something greater occur that supports my highest and best interest. So every day I worked on this list, and then at the end of 7 days I gave it to a close friend, and I said, here, have I missed anything? Because you're always going to miss something. And I did, and she helped me to, you know, really tighten up the list. And then I created a treasure map, something I've taught for years, and I took a big poster board, and I started to take pictures of men that I thought were attractive out of magazines that kind of fit that profile, and men with dogs, and, you know, men engaged in the kinds of things that I'd like to do, and, you know, just this board, sort of like a storyboard of what my life would look like if I were in love with my perfect mate. One night, I was sitting in my apartment with a girlfriend of mine who was an actress, and she was going through a magazine that had personal ads in it. And she was reading the different personal ads with different accents as part of her acting training. So she gave it to me, and she said, here, you try with an Italian accent. And I suck at that, so I said, you know, I'd open up the magazine, and I start to read this one ad, and I say to her, oh, my God, this is an amazing ad. She said, read it to me, and I read it to her, and I said, wow, there was something about it that just really hit me. And she said, call it. I said, absolutely not. I'm not calling a personal ad. Are you kidding me? She said, I dare you to call it. I said, no way. I'm not doing it. So I put the magazine down. Every day for 4 days, I picked up that magazine in my apartment and I read that ad. And on the 5th day, I remembered affirmations plus action creates miracles. And I remember where I was standing. I remember the exact phone I used. I picked up the phone, and I dialed the box number on the ad, and before I said anything into the recording, I said out loud, this is my prayer to the universe. I'm ready to meet somebody important in my life. I don't know whether it's this person or not, but this phone call is my willingness to take action to make that happen. 2 days later, Michael called. I love the name Michael, by the way, as well. And he called to respond to the ad. And we spoke by phone. I was so nervous. Talked by phone. He sent me his photo. I sent him mine. On the day that we were supposed to meet for dinner, I went to the post office and his photo never arrived. And I thought to myself, God, should I cancel the date and wait for the photo? And I said, nah, just go. And I walked to I went to the restaurant where I was to meet him, and he walked through the door, and I'll never forget, he walked through the door, and I thought, please, God, let that be him. And he walked up to me, and he went, Cheryl, and here I was, this professional speaker, right, this, like, all-together woman, and I went, Michael? Like a little girl. And that night was the first time in my life where I couldn't catch my breath through the whole dinner. As a matter of fact, he started making fun of me. And as I got to know him, I realized he met just about everything on my list except cooking. I forgot to put a man that cooks on my list, which I really want to go on record as saying is an important thing if you don't cook, but no. But honest to God, so that was 13 years ago, and I knew this was the man I was going to marry. It was the best day of my life to marry him. It could make me cry just thinking about it. And that was a powerful example of having a strong affirmation, really being clear about what it is you want, being willing to take the actions to make it happen, and, by the way, really investing in how I needed to grow in order to match that list. And I got, that's what a soulmate really is. And that's, when I look at all of the things that have occurred in my life as a result of my intentions, that's the best one. It's amazing to me how when we create intentions and affirmations from that pure soul place, what we're really calling into our lives are the very things that are meant to assist us on our spiritual journey. I mean, my life is so far different than I could have ever imagined, and I didn't know, like, sometimes we don't know the power of our intentions and our affirmations. And that's why it's so important to listen to that little voice inside. Because, Emmett Fox said it years ago, the great spiritual teacher from the early 1900s, Emmett Fox said, usually our deepest desires are those things that we're the most embarrassed to admit out loud. We don't want to say them out loud. But those are usually the desires of the soul. And when we state them and when we put them in writing and when we start to act on them, there is this divine power that rallies behind us to support our efforts. I mean, I met Michael in 2 weeks. That's pretty quick manifestation, wouldn't you say? But there were a lot of years before that where the lag time was much longer. And you know what? It was the right time. And a lot of times we intend to bring things into our lives into an already too full life. And so sometimes what we need to do is actually make the space, as that's actually part of the action plan, is making the space to allow in whatever it is we intend, because too many of us just don't have the space in our lives for that. And that was, something I really did have to create the space. And I also had to look at how deathly afraid I was. I saw marriage as a cage on a very deep level. I saw it as a cage. And little did I know I was living in a cage. And when I met this man, he had the key that opened it. Who would have thought? I would have never thought. The affirmations is just the starting point. That's like going, okay, here's where the goal is. What really gives those affirmations power is the emotion we put behind it. So what's interesting is you start out the journey going, okay, let me start here. Step 1 is what's the affirmation. Step 2 is, how can I generate the emotional power behind that affirmation? And a lot of that comes from taking actions to support that affirmation. That's how you begin to step into that state. And then as you step into that state and you take actions and you put the emotional power behind those affirmations, they begin to manifest themselves in your life. Now you come full circle, and the opposite then becomes true or really it's just more full circle in that it's more about living in that powerful emotional state and the belief that all that I need is right here in this moment. Love truly is the most powerful force in the world. Abundance is our birthright and available to each and every one of us if it's part of our spiritual plan. And so it's living in that emotional and energetic state that is the sort of end. I don't know. It's probably not the end game. We'll see what happens next, right? But it's that way of being that you get to now live in as a result of the work you did early on, kind of installing those affirmations in your brain. I think of my brain as a computer. I've installed some great software. It plays in the background. I don't even know what it is anymore. I don't even hear the words, but I live in the state of those words as much as I possibly can, and I feel when I'm not living in that state.
This is Louise A. Hendricks interview. Take one.
Check my focus real quick, please.
Sure. Then you.
Louise Hay film, Gay Hendricks interview, take two.
I was 24 years old, and I would say that everything that could possibly be wrong with my life was wrong. I weighed 120 pounds more than I weigh now, and I smoked 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day, and I was in a terrible relationship, and I had a job I hated, and so I couldn't think of much. Oh, I didn't like my car either. So I think just about everything was wrong. I'd always struggled with obesity. I was born, like even by the end of my first year of life, I was very fat as a child, and I was taken around to different specialists and things because my mother and my brother were skinny, and so there was something going on there. And so by the time I was 24 years old, I weighed over 100 pounds, more than I weigh now. So I weighed 300 some pounds. And in addition, all this other stuff was going on too. And so I went out for a walk one afternoon. It was a winter in New England, and I was walking just kind of thinking about how am I going to get out of all of this? How am I going to get out of my life? And I stepped on a patch of ice that had some snow over it, and I didn't see the patch of ice, and I stepped on the patch of ice, and my feet shot out from under me, and I went whoomp down on the back of my head on the frozen road, and I hit myself just hard enough that it didn't knock me out. What it did was it kind of knocked me into a state of consciousness that was like nothing else I've ever experienced before. I was present, but I was also, something else was going on. I was kind of like could see more than I could normally see inside myself. And I think I was laying on the ground for maybe 2 minutes or so. In this 2 minutes, I could see down through all the levels of myself. And I'd never been able to see this before. It was like I saw why my muscles were tense. I saw that I had all of this fat around my body and my muscles were tense, and that all of the fat and the muscles tenseness was there because I had all of these feelings inside me that I had never opened up to, like all these things I was angry about that I'd never told anybody about, and all these things I was sad about that I'd never told anybody about, and things I was scared about. And it was like I could see the level of the meat, and then I could see down in the level of the emotion, and then I could see down underneath everything that there was this clear space that there was nothing kind of written on it. There was nothing there. It was kind of like a spiritual space or an open space with pure potential. And I saw that all of those feelings and all of that tension and all of that fat was there because I was living somebody else's life, basically. And that I wouldn't have that stuff if I had a different life. And what I mean by that is my father had died before I was born. He died while my mother was pregnant with me. And he was very obese, just like I was. He smoked heavily, had probably not a very good relationship with my mother. And I know they had a lot of struggles. And so he died in the midst of, while I was gestating, and so I never actually knew him in the world. But I had sort of taken on his life. That's what I could see down inside myself, that it wasn't even my life. And so it was an incredible moment. I think I'd never had anything like that because I always thought this was the reality. This was all there was. you know, and I'd never had a moment of awakening to spirit. And I think that, you know, I always say it is that if you're open, the universe will teach you by tickling you with a feather, but if you're not open, it has to hit you with a sledgehammer. Well, I was so closed that this was like getting hit by a sledgehammer. That was the only way I could learn what I needed to learn, I guess. And so I was in that altered state of consciousness for about 2 minutes, I think, and I began to come back to regular consciousness. I could feel my muscles kind of assembling their tension, and I could feel my awareness of all of this obesity around me. And I could still feel, though, that very sweet open space down in there, that sweet open spiritual space that didn't have anything on it. And as I was coming back to regular consciousness, I had these several thoughts that were very different from anything I'd ever thought. One thought was, I'm going to find out what I can do to feel that clear space all the time. And I thought, I'm going to do what I can to find out how to live that way, how to feel that all the time in my life. And the other thought I had was, I'm going to live my own life. I don't have to live my father's life or anybody's life. I can invent my own life. And if that's possible, how do I want it to be? And so as I was coming back to regular consciousness, I made a commitment to feeling that spiritual space all the time, and then to invent a healthy body, basically, and invent a great life. So I make this new commitment to, I really want to learn how to feel spirit all the time, just in ordinary life. And a friend of mine came over to my house one afternoon and said that one of his old Harvard professors had just come back from India and was giving a talk down the road about 30 miles at his father's house. And did I want to come and hear him? And I said, well, what's he talking about? And he said, well, he'd gone to India and he'd kind of gotten enlightened, and he was talking about yoga and meditation. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting, you know, maybe I'll go. And so we go down there, and there is this guy in a robe, a white robe, and there's all these devotees around. And I remember a girl came up and offered us fruit from a fruit bowl, you know, and I was thinking, what is this? You know, is this some cult or something? Well, it turned out to be Ram Dass, who was Neil's Harvard professor. Under those days, he was named Richard Alpert, and when Neil had taken his course at Harvard, and now he was named Ram Dass. And so Ram Dass had just come back from India, and he was just totally, you know, he was so blissed out and everything. And part of me related to it, but another part of me thought, what are these people selling? You know, like, I was very cynical about that kind of thing at the time. And so I went up after the talk and asked Ram Dass, I said, look, I got to tell you, I'm very skeptical about this kind of stuff. This looks sort of insane to me, but since I'm here, I just had this experience where I fell on the ice, and I told him the experience. And I said, so I want to learn how to feel that clear feeling in me all the time, just in ordinary life. I felt it for a minute while I was sort of knocked out, but I'd like to feel it all the time without bashing my head on the ice. And I remember he looked up at me for a long time, and just sort of looked at me up and down. And he said, you should do some breathing exercises. And I said, breathing exercises? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? I'd never heard of anything like that. And he said, well, in India, if you have a problem, you might do some yoga around it or some breathing around it. And it's as valid a way as talking to a therapist about it. And so I said, well, where do you get something like this? And he said, well, just be open to it. It'll come to you. And I said, all right. And so the next day, I was down at the grocery store, and in the checkout line, so I was, you know, pushing my cart up through the checkout line, and they had a little kiosk of paperback books, a little round kiosk of paperback books. And I glanced down, and there is a book called Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation. I'll never forget this, by Jess Stern. And I can see the cover just like it's sitting right here now. And I remember looking at this, okay, Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation. All right, that's interesting. And so I picked it up, and I open it up, and there's an entire chapter on breathing exercises, pranayama. So here I go in one day, from never having heard of something to Ram Dass telling me, be open to it, to there it is in my hand. And so I bought it. And so I took it home, and I just started doing the exercises all the way through. I remember it was a Saturday afternoon, and my wife and baby were gone to visit her mother, who lived about maybe 40 miles away. And so I had the place to myself. And I just started doing these exercises right out of the book. I would do one and then flip the page and do another one. So I started about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. By about midnight, you know, and after doing all of these breathing and yoga exercises and chanting and everything like that, I was in touch with that same space that I'd felt when I bashed myself on the ice falling down. And so there it was, you know, there was a whole different way to get there. I had lost about 75 pounds, so I was sort of, you know, I could feel what could happen, you know, if this actually came true, if the dream really came true. And this friend of mine that I'd known years before showed up for a visit, and he and I were both sort of eating buddies, you know. In those days we would go out for an ice cream sundae or something. We worked at the same place, and we were both obese. And he was still, you know, a 300-pounder, and I'd gotten down to a real slim 225 or something like that, you know. And so he looked at me. I remember I opened the door, and he looked at me, and he said, God, what are you doing, you know, and what happened to you? And I tried to explain this thing that I was going through. And I remember the way he looked at me. And it's probably a lot, you know, it's probably like a lot of people when they start some kind of a change process, the people that are in their lives sort of don't know how to relate to it. And so what he did, this was so bizarre, he went into town and he brought back a 5-pound box of chocolate caramels, which was like the ultimate bad food for me, you know, during that time, you know. And but it was like he walked in the door, and he was a practical joker. I mean, this was partly a practical joke, but I could see the sort of mean edge to it, you know, of kind of wanting to sabotage and wanting to kind of get me to be the way I was. And I realized if I was going to have to, that I didn't have any way to relate to him. And so I basically had to throw him out of my house, you know, leave, please leave. And he did. And what an amazing... 6 months later, I got a call from a friend of mine and said, are you sitting down? I said, yeah. And he said, Ken died. He had a heart attack and died. And he was 26 years old, you know, which was, I mean, and I saw in that moment how that was me. So that was a wake-up moment for me, and a way of saying, life has very serious consequences, you know, choices have very serious consequences. After that year, I moved to California for a few years and went to graduate school. And so over the next few years, I pretty much felt good all the time, and I could see well, and, you know, my weight stabilized and all of that. And I hadn't ever worked out the whole relationship aspect of life, and I continued to have kind of one relationship after the other of, you know, they'd get to a certain point and then they would fall apart. I would usually start finding fault with the person, or the other person would find fault with me, and we'd never be able to work beyond a certain point with our relationship. And so one magic day, I remember setting the intention of, oh, I learned how to see, I learned how to be an okay weight, I learned how to live healthy, free of addictions, I learned how to eat well. How come it didn't occur to me that I could do that with loving? You know, it had never occurred to me that I could actually design my own life around love and relationships. And so that was a big revelation to me, the idea that the same process could work. And so I began to work with this idea of enjoying a flow of love in my life, and that love comes to me. I don't have to pursue it. And as I began to work with that, I had this other amazing insight. In fact, I was walking down the street in San Francisco. I remember in downtown San Francisco with a woman that I'd been with for a year or so, and we always had the same complaint with each other. Her complaint about me was that I was not in touch with my feelings, and that I never communicated about anything important, that I never would talk about the real stuff, you know. And I, of course, had my defenses against that, you know, that I forget what they were, but I had my good justification for why I didn't talk about my feelings and didn't talk about things that were important. My complaint about her was that she was super critical. And so whenever she would get going with me about, we never talk about anything important, or you're never in touch with your feelings, I would say, well, I would be if you weren't so darn critical. You know, and it would get us into this loop then. And I was walking down the street with her in San Francisco, and I realized, I don't know where this insight came from, but I suddenly realized that, oh, I create that. I'm the one that creates and has created my life so that I'm in relationship with a very critical person. And up until that moment, I thought it was their problem, that I just happened to have the bad luck of always ending up with a critical woman. And so I remember stopping on the street kind of to think about this, and she said, what's going on? And I was kind of trying to share this insight with her. And she wasn't having any part of it, by the way. She was not buying my little insight at all. And so the other awareness that I had in that moment was that the very thing that I complained about all the time, and this is true for everybody, I think, that the very thing we complain about over and over is the very thing that we're creating happening. In other words, we got this loop going of not realizing that we draw certain experiences into our life and then going around complaining about that all the time. So anything you complain about repetitively is something that you have an unconscious intention to produce. And so that hit me like a ton of bricks. I suddenly realized, oh, I require a critical woman in my life. That's me dreaming up that dream. And my next thought was, well, I think I'll dream up a better dream. You know, I'll dream up a dream of being surrounded by loving and supportive people. And that was really a big moment for me, because nobody in the history of my family that I know of has ever had a successful relationship besides me and Katie. In other words, up until that moment, my parents had a disastrous relationship. My grandparents, just about everybody, everywhere I looked in the family, was full of people who either they had a very kind of like a routine relationship, they went through the roles, certain roles, or they managed to stay in a long-term relationship through the regular application of vodka and other kinds of things that allowed them to stay put, you know. So I realized that it would be breaking absolutely radical new ground if I was able to create a relationship that worked, that would be an unthinkable thing to do. And what better thing to make happen, you know, than something completely unthinkable. And so I sat down on the floor of my apartment at the time and designed what I wanted in a close relationship in my mind. And honesty, a relationship where both of us were free to pursue our creativity, our creative callings, and that each of us took full responsibility for our lives so that we didn't get into blaming each other. So if something came up, we would just say, why did I create that? You know? And so I remember saying to the universe at the time, that's what I want, and if it's not in the cards for me to have that, I'll be alone. I'm fine with being alone, but I promise I will never settle for less. And I think that little thing I said at the end kind of cracked the whip. You know, I said, that's what I'm about here. And so from that moment, it only took a month until Katie came into my life. And one of the great moments of my life was my first meeting with her, because she came up to me to ask me a question. I was actually giving a seminar at the graduate school where she was getting her PhD, and she was also one of the instructors there at the school. She was the movement therapy instructor and taught some of the classes there, and she was also getting her PhD. And so she came up to ask me a question during this seminar I was giving. I don't remember what the question is to this day, but I said to her, I'm very attracted to you. I just want to let you know that. And I said, but I also want to let you know that I'm only interested in relationships where both people speak honestly to each other, and both people take responsibility for their lives, and both people are committed to their creativity. And on those terms, would you like to have a cup of coffee with me? And it was kind of I'd never said anything like that in my life. You know, it was a totally outrageous thing to say, especially given the context of what was going on. And so I remember the look on her face. She kind of went like this. You know, it's like cogitate, cogitate, compute, compute, does not compute. And suddenly she said, okay. And I can do that. And so, you know, that was our first meeting and basically set the tone for our whole last 27 years together.
I am rolling. You rolling over there?
Yes.
Well, when I was 12, I knew I wanted to be a doctor and a scientist. I was brought to Boston to essentially have my spine completely fused. And I remember looking up saying, I'm going to be a doctor and a scientist someday. And so I became pre-med at a very early age. But it's interesting, after you farm your intellect for so long, then your body, your spirit throws you an illness to force you to cultivate a part of your body, your brain that you're not using in your mind. And so after, you know, working as pre-med, I started falling asleep a lot, up to 17 hours a day. And this is kind of a difficult problem. I'll give you an example. Everyone say, I fall asleep during movies, and I fall asleep during class. Well, have you ever fallen asleep running and gotten run over by a truck because you fell asleep? And I actually was. So there was all kinds of falling asleep stories, and this wasn't funny. And this was making it hard for me, you know, to finish Brown and graduate from medical school. And so they gave me a medicine, and what modern medicine got me only so far. It was great. It bought me 2 years, and I was able to finish Brown from a 2.2 average to a 4.0. So it was like, I'm healed, praise the Lord. Well then, like modern medicine can only take you so far. And the medicine started knocking out my bone marrow, and there wasn't another medicine that would help. And so I was forced to look for other things that most people don't want. So I remember going to a medical intuitive, and I thought she was a nut, which is, of course, what I've been becoming. And she told me that my brain freezes up, and it was related to intuition. And I thought, you know, well, how do I fix this freezing up thing, which is falling asleep? She said, I don't know. So you get a lot of that. So I went to a bookstore in Boston, and I walked in. It was Trident Bookstore. I don't know if it's still there. And I just was sitting, because I used to, well, actually not sitting, standing. I'd stand a lot because of thinking I wouldn't fall asleep. And I look up at the shelf, and there's this book called You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. So I figured the medical intuitive's not going to help me. I figure out maybe this woman named Louise Hay. And you know, her hair was yellow, so. And so I took the book home, and you have to understand I was really athletic. I used to stay awake. I'd run 5 miles. I'd like do reps. And, you know, there were these things called affirmations that if you did them, you're supposed to get, you can heal your life, was the whole point. So I figured, you know, I'll give it a try. I didn't have much else going for me at the time. Plus, student loans were coming due, and I had no other options. I actually could not afford not to go to medical school. So I did reps, just like you do in a gym. Instead of lifting barbells or whatever I love myself just the way I am, 10 times. And after 3 months, I stopped falling asleep, and I was able to go to medical school, which was absolutely lovely. And so I was going to throw away this intuition, throw away this affirmation stuff, because it was something that I needed to get to be kind of normal. But it didn't work. I got to my sophomore year, and I started really hitting the wall. I was doing an MD and a PhD, as anyone would overcompensate who has intuition. So I started blowing discs and stuff, and I couldn't end up going in the intellectual career that I wanted to, being a neurosurgeon, because you can't stand up. So I chose psychiatry because I could sit down, and I hated it. It was boring. But I learned, it's very interesting. All roads lead back to spirituality and intuition, no matter how brainy you want to become. Because the only part of psychiatry that I really liked was cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectic behavioral therapy, which is fascinating. You look at these books by Beck, all these fathers of cognitive behavioral therapy, and you open them up. And the rewiring patterns that they give for obsessive compulsive personality disorder, or, selfishness of narcissistic personality, or all these, or even just normal people who are a little messed up, was I love myself just the way I am. It was just really remarkable. So you understand that what I learned in psychiatry, if I taught a patient to do this, I could bill Blue Cross and get paid. Or the patient could get the same treatment, and You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay. So in my PhD, and in my psychiatric residency, and I'm now a neuropsychiatrist and I work in the field of intuition, I learned the biochemistry of how someone rewires their thought patterns from I get one health problem after another to I love myself just the way I am completely lovable. We now know that we can rewire our patterns in our brain with cognitive behavioral therapy or affirmations. It changes the way our brains are wired, and they light up differently. So it's not just this fluff, woo-woo stuff with purple, but it really has biochemical, neurochemical, neuropharmacological effects just as effective, if not more effective, than Prozac, Zoloft, whatever else you have. So as far as I'm concerned, Louise Hay, former model, former therapist, writes this little book, this little blue book, and lo and behold, she discovers something by observation that science supports decades later. And we now can see how it works, at least from a biochemical point of view, on a functional MRI and PET scan. So I would be forever indebted to Louise Hay, what she did to me personally, because she woke me up, and literally what she has done as a revolutionary for, from my perspective, modern medicine. People have been getting hunches, intuition, seeing things, clairvoyance, hearing things, clairaudience, feeling things, clairsentience for years. And the thing is, if you look at everyone, you look at an audience, you look at people in a bus station, everyone's wired differently. But everybody's got a part of them, it's with a Boston accent, that's not right. A part of them that makes them unique, stands out from the crowd. And that part of you that's not right, that's different, that's a black sheep, that's the part of you, the window of opportunity for intuition. So for me, I've always been not right. My parents sent me to get evaluated when I was 5 because they said something was wrong with her. And though I passed and I got straight A's in all these classes, I clearly used to get bad conduct marks for, especially in the second grade. The teacher said, finish his class early, but clearly is distracted, is really interested in what's going on with everybody else in the room. When I was in the 8th grade, a teacher who probably had PMS looked at me sideways and I started to cry. And of course they took me to the guidance office because they're supposed to give you guidance, which is supposed to get you out of your right hemisphere of emotion and put you cleanly and neatly and hermetically sealed in your left brain intellect. And he said, you're never going to get through life with this sensitivity. And then when I went to see the medical intuitive, she said, when you learn to use your intuition, you'll stop falling asleep. The thing that I get, my intuition is like the thing that everybody gets their intuition, the part of them that's the flaw. It's this inattention that causes me to be concerned with what's going on in someone else's life. And then It's the part of me that falls asleep and goes into a dreamlike state. They used to study that. They used to teach medical students how to do that. In ancient Rome or Greece, I can't remember, they're all the same to me, they would put the medical students in the temple and teach them how to interpret their dreams and go into alternative states. And, of course, the other health issues I've had that have helped me get a feeling in my body. So for me, I work as a medical intuitive, and with knowing only the name and age of someone and not seeing them, I can see specific things in their emotional life, specific, that I see aggravates their health. And then I look at their body intuitively. They're not in the room. They sign a consent form that we're not having a doctor-patient relationship. I'm not giving them a diagnosis, prescribing treatment, doing psychotherapy. That's my disclaimer. They sign that. And then I look at their body intuitively, clairvoyantly. I look at their eyes, ears, neck, thyroid, heart, breast, lungs, and every one of them. And I describe things that I see. I don't diagnose. So I'll say, I see redness where your esophagus and your stomach come together. And they'll say, yes, that's that reflux, and so on. And then I give them solutions on how to, things that they can talk to their doctor about to make the symptoms better. But thought patterns that they can change to rewire the thought patterns that increase their chance toward illness. And where do we get those thought patterns from? Beck, a la Louise Hay. So that's how you do it. You learn to respond to the intuition in your body through symptoms, and then rewire the thought patterns that increase your chance toward getting that. So I wanted to understand if there was biochemical, scientific literature, left brain literature, to support intuition, medical intuition. Edgar Casey, people before him, Carolyn Mace. So I went to the Countway Library at Harvard, and I was doing research for Northrop's book, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. Being somewhat greedy, I got one of those big Xerox cards that you can get 500 copies, and there's a Xerox machine in the Countway that has a pedal, so you can do both hands. And I would look up organs in the first chakra, bones, joints, the immune system, and looked at emotional patterns. Just what Louise Hay does. You take her book, and you footnote it. You look for, and the thing is, it's amazing. They have L1 and L2, which these levels of all these old literature. It's incredible. I found all this stuff: thyroid disease, irritable bowel syndrome, arrhythmias, alopecia, OBGYN, because Northrop's book needed it. And I just kept files in the back of my Honda Civic, which had no electrical work at that time. I had to drive only when it was light out. But anyway, I collected these files, and I just wanted to know, and I kept them. And then when an editor found about me when I was working on Northrop's book, Chris Northrop, I call her Northrop because that's what we do when you're on a team. You call people by their last names. She said, can you write a book? I said, sure. She said, how can you do it? How long can it take? I said, about 8 months. She said, you're kidding. I said, oh no, it's ready to go. Because I had my 3-ring binders. And I had my little, when I read something, I put it on the card and that's done. My favorite part, when the book came out, of course my thyroid fell out. Graves' disease, my TSH went zip, 0. It's because I was afraid of talking about it because I'm a doctor and I don't want to lose my license and have people, throw a fit. Anyway, so of course it was a really bad environment, and 2020 asked to come film me. So I said, okay. So they came. This guy puts me in a chair and he's got the thing there. And I won't even use his name because I don't want his aggravation. But anyway, so he starts rolling the camera and my cats were in the room. And he says, do you talk to the dead? And I went, no, I don't talk to the dead. I can see them, but I don't talk to them. Why would I want to talk about them with them? And he got a little mad. He said, he kept asking me the same questions. And he said, clearly, there is no scientific evidence to suggest that thought patterns are related to health, that there's anything to do with medical intuition. And I was sitting next to the cabinet with these 3-ring binders. I went, I am so glad that you asked. And the cameraman, I said, these binders, I said, this first chakra, and they're clearly labeled because I am, a little bit of obsessive compulsive. We all have a little inner Martha Stewart. Anyway, I said, for example, Mr. Brown, not your real name. I took the 4th chapter. I said, if you were to have problems with unresolved hostility in relationships, the guy starts to get really nervous. I said, you would have an increased risk for cholesterol and heart attack, dying, sudden death from a heart attack. And the guy starts to look at it. I said, but there's more. They have a study here that says that when you learn how to fully express and release your hostility, you lower your risk of dying from a heart attack. Don't you think that's important information? Medical intuition can call it fourth emotional center or fourth chakra, or biological research can call it hostility, which is really you're mad as hell. Either way, I think it's unconscionable to prevent people from hearing this material. And he said, cut, and that was it, and they decided not to do it because it wasn't a flake kind of thing that would reveal it. You know what I'm saying?
Test 1, 2. The boy stood on the burning deck, which was made of brass. He did a triple somersault and landed on his hands and knees. Louise has affected my life profoundly in many, many ways. And I can recall the first time I was chatting with her, and it was on a tour of Australia, and it was one of the first conversations we ever had. And so I was trying to rush her around, and no one should rush Louise around. She is right time, right space, all in its good time type of person. And I said, Louise, let's do this and let's kill two birds with one stone. And Louise looked at me horrified and said, why would you want to kill two birds? So from that moment on, I was really careful. Now I say, let's kill two stones with one bird. And it says a lot about her because she always walks a talk, and she's always careful in the choice of words, and everyone around her seems to pick up on that. And I find that from that moment on, I really was careful in what I said. I stopped saying I can't stand this, that person's a pain in the neck, or I'm hopeless because I'm hopeless because I can't remember people's names, or I'm useless because I lose the car keys. From the first time I met Louise, I realised how important your word is and how it can affect your character, your self-esteem, who you believe you are. And so I always try to be impeccable with my word. And so, sure, I don't remember names, but I sure remember faces. And I've never lost the car keys. I just misplaced them for a few seconds. And so that's more accurate. That's more in line. And Louise has, taught me that at a very, very early stage of our association, and it's helped me right through all my business life. I always try to be a lot more careful with my words and be impeccable with my words so that people understand what I truly mean and how I truly feel, rather than trying to second guess it all. The words are absorbed on many, many levels. My forte is dream coaching. I'm a dream coach, not a dream analyst or a dream interpreter. A dream coach assists people to decode their dreams in their own special way and get the messages that they need to get, rather than decode other people's dreams, and rather than try to, solve the problems of the world via dreams. All they need to do is decode their dreams and work out what adds meaning to their life. So as a dream coach, the power of word is very, very apparent to me, because every word that you speak, every emotion, every feeling, everything that you take in during the day is processed during your sleep time. And what we do, we have this facility of collecting all this information, and then it has to be filed somewhere or disposed of. Much the same as you do with your computer every day. You get an inbox full of mail, and you have to decide what's junk, what's spam, what's important to answer, what's interesting to read and doesn't need a response. And so words are exactly the same as that. They penetrate our mind and even right down to the cellular level. And it's very, very important then to be able to process those. And once you fall asleep, and during the sleep process, we review everything that's happened during the day, and we almost jumble it all up. It's like you get a jigsaw puzzle, and you look down, and the puzzle, the whole picture is apparent to you. Now, to really excel, you have to put all the pieces and jumble them all up and put them all over the place, and then put it back together, and then you understand the picture again. Well, that's how we manufacture memory. We pick up all the information, we see it all during the day, it gets jumbled up and filed and all messed up, and then it gets reprogrammed in a fashion our mind can understand it, and then we manufacture memory. Because we speak in metaphors, but we dream in symbols. So we have to see a symbol that will create a memory. Let me give you a quick example of that. If you keep seeing apples in your dreams, it doesn't necessarily mean health. It could mean your iPod, it could mean your Macintosh computer. We see a symbol of the iPod and the Macintosh computer in our dreams as an apple, and then that gets filed into our mind, Macintosh. It could mean forbidden fruit. It could mean enlightenment. It doesn't matter what it is you dream or the words you hear during the day, they still have to be processed as symbols. Our right brain takes over, becomes dominant while we're asleep. And the language of our creative, expansive brain is symbols, whereas the left brain is more logical. Like, you need your left brain fully in gear if you're balancing your check account, balancing the budget. You need to understand complex issues. Well, the left brain is in charge. But when you are catching 40 winks, you want to get a good night's sleep. You want the logical part of you to relax and reprogram itself and run a maintenance program. And so what happens is, while we're dreaming, we actually see dreams to keep us asleep. They're much in the same way. If you've got a bunch of kids running around and they're misbehaving, you put on a DVD, put on their favourite movie, they're watching the movie, and you can go ahead and do your housework, or you can go ahead and do what you plan to do because they're distracted. Well, the same thing works with our dreams. We dream to keep us asleep, to give us the maximum number of hours of sleep, because the more sleep we get, the more refreshed we are, the more positive we are when we wake up. And it's very, very important to wake up each and every morning optimistic, because if you don't feel like getting out of bed, how are you going to earn an income to feed yourself and your loved ones? And how are you going to pass on your genes and feel like it? How are you going to create the next generation if you're not optimistic? And so this is something that came to us right at primordial times. The facility, all mammals dream, but humans have got perhaps the most creative mind in this universe, and 1/3 of that of our existence every day is spent sleeping. It must be valuable, it must be important, or we would have eliminated it. We would have bred that out of our system. Like, there was a time where we had tails and hair all over our body, and we don't have that anymore because we've decided as humans we want to stand up straight and we want to wear bikinis, and therefore all the hair disappeared and our tails disappeared because we don't need them anymore. We're not going to swing from trees anymore. Now, if dreaming wasn't useful, we would have adapted out of our systems. There will come a time when everyone's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will end up having longer and stronger thumbs. Only because right now they're all SMSing and texting one another, and they're using this. And keyboards will disappear because everyone can't be bothered with carrying around a xylophone. They got a little phone and bang, 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 and they get the message off, and they know shortcuts, and there's a whole new language appearing. Now, why? Because it's more useful to us. And so if dreams weren't useful to us, we would have cancelled them out of the system. They are unfiltered, clean, pure messages from our subconscious, and they are telling us what's going on in our heart, in our what adds meaning to our lives. Now, Louisa's work supports all that, because if you go to bed feeling grumpy, worrying about the mortgage, feeling as though you haven't got enough to maintain life, then of course you're going to wake up feeling depressed, melancholy. But what if you went to sleep believing that all is well, you are safe, everything will appear at the right time when it's supposed to, believing that the answers will make themselves apparent, the healer will appear when you need it, the information that you need to proceed will present itself when you need it. These are all basic Louise L. Hay philosophies, and if you accept those philosophies as you fall asleep, and you fall asleep with a feeling of abundance, a feeling that you are safe, you wake up in a more optimistic frame of mind, and that in itself will make things appear much quicker. It's the same principle as if you left a light on the back porch on at night. Within minutes, every moth in town is going to be attracted. They're attracted by the warmth, they're attracted by the light, and they want to hang around that bulb. Well, if you see that you are that light, if you are warm and supportive and you're oozing optimism, people will just want to hang around you just to feel good. The moment they want to hang around you, opportunities happen, and fear and frustration can't reside where someone feels abundant. If you take the time to respect your dreams and realise that you are able to reprogram your life through them, if you get to the point where you can have lucid dreams and you actually tell yourself that you are healthy, abundant, and extremely attractive, then it will transmute into your waking life, because you've accepted at a cellular level. And lucid dreaming does this for you the same as it goes beyond creative visualization. It goes beyond the law of attraction. This is you and you alone in a realm that actually creates the very next day. And you're able to program this. And so to that end, as you fall asleep with this feeling of abundance, fall asleep with a feeling of being safe and nurtured. And you'll find that the dreams you have are dreams where you are climbing mountains and you are achieving. You're going up an elevator, you're going up an escalator, you're climbing to the top of a cliff. You get to the cliff edge and you jump and you begin to fly, and you look down and you're able to perceive all that's around you. You don't have to flap your wings, it's effortless. And so you see these dreams where you're actually going to the highest point. A lot of dreams will be in the attic of the house, on the top of a house, on top of a building. You see yourself ascending. And these feelings carry on when you wake up. You don't know why. You don't even have to recall your dreams. You wake up and you feel refreshed and optimistic. Now the idea is to make sure you go to sleep with the creation of these feelings. I recommend to anyone that I work with, grab a deck of Louise's Power Thought cards and just go through the cards and see which one resonates you and with you that particular night. And take that card and put it underneath your pillow and sleep on it. Some of the most incredible breakthroughs that mankind uses today or enjoys have come via dreams. We all have heard how that statement, oh, look, I'll sleep on it. That's because you know that there's answers there. We can all invent anything we want. It's all available to us. The only thing we need to do is believe that they are valuable, have self-belief, and then sleep on it, and it will manifest.